and you find yourself in a situation where you're maybe updating that ROPA once a year, and probably that's not quite good enough at a certain point. Some of those companies, I think, in the DSAR kind of orchestration space, try to provide you with the tools inside your environment so that they're not necessarily processing the data themselves. I think the future is going to be like a kind of bot that sits as a privacy co-pilot for you, and I think helps analyze things.
Hello everyone, I am Sergio Maldonado and this is Masters of Privacy, a set of interviews covering the intersection of marketing, data, privacy and technology with a clear goal in mind, which is redefining the relationship between people, brands and media around transparency and control. Which is to say, we're aiming for real customer centricity, or if you will, human centricity. We regularly talk to DPOs, CMOs, CDOs and whoever else we find interesting and able to share valuable insights. So we hope you like it. Please do reach out if you have any ideas on future topics or speakers. Okay, we've got Andy Dale here today. He's a very experienced general counsel and also chief privacy officer, now working at OpenAP, before that at Alyce, which was acquired by Sendoso. He's an advisor to various startups. He's also a co-host of a Data Protection Breakfast Club, together with Pedro Pavon. And with Andy, we've gone through the changes that we could expect in the US with the new administration, even though the government is going so fast that it will leave us behind in terms of whatever we could predict. But we've got that. We've also gone through things that software could be solving in terms of data protection and privacy programs, since Andy is an advisor to a few companies in that space, and things where he sees software can make a difference or automation could make a difference, and a few other things. Let's go for it. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. So to start somewhere, right? As a warm up. So the difference between the DPO and the CPO, also from an American perspective.
Yeah.
What's your experience in terms of transitioning, and where do you feel most comfortable?
I actually heard about the DPO role even prior to the GDPR. I think most people, at least in the US, started hearing that term after the GDPR became effective in 2018. I'd heard about it before because of the EU directive, which was a law, but directed the EU member states to enact their own legislation. But a lot of them still had the concept of a data protection officer that is supposed to serve in an independent way, focused on data protection issues and from a consumer lens. And reporting sort of independently to management and the board on those things. So when I joined this company, I was talking to our CEO about our global remit and about privacy and about how we were complying with the EU directive at the time. And we just started talking about it. And as the GDPR became clear that it was coming, I said, someone's going to sit in this role. Why don't I do it first and see if that's the right thing for us? We're a small company, so I think we can try that and see how it goes. So I served in that role as DPO and VP of legal for that company for like maybe a little less than a year, and it just became obvious to me that the DPO is quite different than, say, the chief privacy officer or the person that runs privacy law or the legal side of things in a company.
That's it. It gets people very confused in the US, especially.
Yeah.
And if you're used to being a general counsel and having more of an impact on the business, I think you're probably happier in this CPO role.
Well, I've steered myself in my career towards roles that have both, because I do care a lot about privacy, and when I work in advertising and marketing, technology companies, privacy is not just like a thing you got to do. It's part of the fabric of the ecosystem that you're involved in. It's something everyone cares about and talks about, and it's something that you have to take seriously if you want people to buy your software or work with you or partner with you in any significant way. So I've steered myself towards roles that allow me to do both things. But I think you're right, Sergio. Like I'm a general counsel first, and I'm a privacy lawyer second. But it's a close second, I think.
Very good. Well, thank you. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So then, something I wanted to ask you is the whole thing with privacy technology and us leveraging technology in order to do things in terms of compliance. So there's both the GDPR approach, where there's a lot of documentation and you need to prove, right? This idea of accountability. There's a lot of sort of self-enforcement. You need to document all of this stuff. You need to do all of your DPIAs or PIAs from a US perspective. But when it comes to ROPA, to records of processing activities, when it comes to data subject access requests, we had another episode on that. What do you see really working, really taking off? Or is it all simply a way to build a little stack around consent and it's not really fully taking shape? How do you see this?
I think some of this is dictated, Sergio, by size and scale of the business itself. So, in the GC CPO seat, I'm sitting there looking at what is our, first and foremost, what does our business need and where are we going as a company? How big are we? How big are we going to get? Who's on the other side of partnerships and deals that we want to do? If there's large enterprise, companies on the other side of deals, even if we're small, we better have a compliance program that we can speak to. Now, the question of whether that's in spreadsheets versus in tooling is an interesting one. I think for a certain period of time, small companies can definitely get through with diligent work in spreadsheets and making a really strong effort and strong case. I mean, I don't know who you had on from, different data protection authorities, but I think, if I'm channeling those that I've talked to about it, documentation of some kind is a step that's necessary. They need to see that you are trying and you were trying to make an attempt to do things and to comply with the law. Now, whether you have tools in order to do that, I think is sort of in the eye of the beholder and in the eye of the company. But my general take is that it doesn't take much to get to a point where technology is going to help you. I think spreadsheeting is great, but like you have to keep it updated and you have to keep looking at it all the time, and it's easy to get distracted by other things and a deal happening, and you find yourself in a situation where you're maybe updating that ROPA once a year, and probably that's not quite good enough at a certain point. And so you were absolutely correct. First to market in a lot of these kind of documentation areas of technology is definitely OneTrust. So kudos to them. Lots of customers using that tooling for ROPA documentation, questionnaires, impact assessments, and things of that nature. But as that happened, of course, tools spring up in the other sort of silos of privacy, and you mentioned some of them. So I view them as record keeping as one sort of segment of technology, data subject request technology as sort of another that helps really facilitate a company's ability to orchestrate actually deleting something or actually surfacing data back to a consumer. And then I think a third, you mentioned consent. I think there are some companies that focus heavily on that and some that just kind of have that as a side benefit of other technology that they're creating. And I think there's lots of different varieties and people coming at it from a different angles, but it's a really crowded space.
Totally, yeah. In the marketing world, and you have experience in marketing technology as well, right? In Martech, there's Scott Brinker, right? The chief
Yeah.
Martech, right? And he has for a long time been talking about the idea of best of breed versus a full stack. And there would be the large integrators, the large groups like an Adobe or a Salesforce or anything like that would try and sell everything. And they would be best of breed for specific cases. Now you bring that over to the privacy tech space, And they're also providers, right? So we have the same problem, but this time with privacy technology, where instead of having one simple supplier, you may have 15 because they're good at the little thing. And they also are processing personal data. For example, someone that is going to help you with data subject access requests, calling all of these APIs and so on. These companies, they themselves carry some risk. And they may be processing data if you're in an EU country, processing data in the US, another problem, another Schrems II headache in the future, maybe Schrems III
Yeah.
headache, just because
Yeah.
they're doing data subject access requests for European, residents.
Well, yeah, some of those companies, I think, in the DSAR kind of orchestration space, try to provide you with the tools inside your environment so that they're not necessarily processing the data themselves. You're right, though, that's not the case everywhere. And so you do have to think about their compliance. But I think like zooming out a little bit, um, what you're getting at is an interesting point, which is not all personal data is created equal. So a browser cookie or an IP address to me is very different than a consumer's home address or their bank, bank details. There's a difference. And so when we take the approach of looking at which vendors we're utilizing for what purposes, I think you're absolutely right. Like if I'm entrusting my data with a cloud provider like AWS, that's a much safer choice than the best of breed that I don't know as much about. Conversely, on you might be able to take a flyer on a company that's doing ROPA in a new and different way. I don't think that information is necessarily chock full of personal information. It's full of confidential company confidential information, so it's important potentially. But I think risk rating these things is important as well. So I think you can take some risk. Risk is maybe the wrong word. You can take some liberty in terms of exploring new and different tooling, potentially in your sort of compliance bucket in a different way than you might maybe on the consent side, because the consent side does in some ways interact directly with the consumer and it raises the transfer issues. And I think we're seeing though, and you noted quickly like that OneTrust popped up in Europe, and that was interesting. But there's a company, Domi, there's others like that are in Europe doing as good or better of a job
Yeah.
on the consent tooling side of things. And so I think like there there's options now everywhere, I think.
If you could dream of something that is missing out of everything that you see out there, everything that you use, what is missing?
I think I would like to see, so in the record keeping space, I think it would be really nice to have you do the work, you get a tool, whether it's OneTrust or Safeguard Privacy or some other one that is collecting information from vendors and possibly
Yeah.
from yourself in a self-assessment. And then what we don't have yet would be pie in the sky, perhaps, but an AI system that will consistently be ingesting all of the new things that are happening in the privacy world and then sending me updates, asking me questions. Do you want to update this? This happened. Rather than having to revisit my ROPA, all the time or multiple times a year or revisit a DPIA because something happened or there's an enforcement change. I think the future is going to be like a kind of bot that sits as a privacy co-pilot for you and I think helps analyze things.
That's ideal. Thank you. That's great. That's a great thought.
Yeah.
And also, it's text, right? It's content, so it's sort of calls for it. Something I did try to do at some point was that with privacy notices, where if you're across, five separate jurisdictions and they're changing the law, but what does it say if you dynamically change it and the team internally is not able
Yeah.
to really reflect it, right?
I think there's a difference definitely between like something that would update my public facing documents, like my privacy notices, versus something that gave me internal advice.
Yeah.
Have you thought about this law just changed the age of a minor from, 18 to 13 in
Yeah.
such and such state, what these are the suggested kind of things to consider. I feel like something like that could be useful. And I think that's a main thing. And then I think, the there are companies that are working on making that flow of running a vendor management program simpler. So I think vendor diligence is like it's in all these laws, it's in the US state laws. And I think what you're going to see is a lot more scrutiny on the program that you're keeping. And as a result of that, uh, heightened scrutiny in a good way on what you're doing to assess vendors. Do you just have a call with them and ask them? Do you
Yeah. Yeah.
send them questionnaires? Do you even follow up on the question? Do you look at it? Do you have a risk rating? And that's where I think technology can help. I think like Safeguard Privacy does this. I think potentially OneTrust and others are working on things like this.
Yeah, see, everyone has some sort of, I don't know if Osano, other people have a database of vendors and they rank them. I've had my own
Right.
database as well, our own
Right.
database, because it's given me so many headaches. But in the end, my conclusion has been that we're discriminating against the smaller players all the time in analytics, in A/B testing, in campaign management, in all of these tooling that you're auditing. For a data controller to be able to trust them as a processor, that the smaller they are, the harder it is for them to go through all of these forms and requests and certifications and security accreditations that a large data controller would be expecting. And every day they're being measured against the Microsoft. And then now we've got in the US also data breach laws. When you have them for a while, and they also add all of these burdens in terms of liability to a DPA, which is crazy for a small supplier. So what I see is that slowly we're pushing the smaller ones away in my world, so in terms of my customers, and they're being sort of pushed aside just because compliance is a moat for the larger suppliers, and it's easier for a legal department to simply check the boxes with a larger supplier.
I think that's the case in the EU for sure. Like if you're trying to sell into the EU from the US, it's pretty difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, good. So, Andy, the government just changed in the US. And what do you think is going to change? So, we were waiting I mean, not really waiting. We had a couple of programs on a federal privacy law that doesn't seem to be, uh, it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. We've had some people explain it, but maybe you've got a new take on this also because there's a new government. How do you see that? So a comprehensive privacy law, or whether there'll be a change in terms of, I mean, we've seen what happened with AI. So what do you think is going to happen with this
Yeah.
new government?
The Commerce Committee chair in the Senate is now Ted Cruz, who is obviously a Republican, and that's change. And Ted Cruz has had reservations about the kind of nature of the private right of action that was in the last version of a US federal law that really had some momentum behind it. His concern is that, plaintiffs' lawyers will be, overly aggressive and and he doesn't want to embolden them with the law. And I think so. I think there's significant ground to cover to fix at least that issue. But I think he said recently, yeah, we're pretty far from a bipartisan agreement on this. But it just started, right? They just started. They haven't even talked about it yet. They haven't even met. I think there's more momentum and consensus around some laws focused on children. There's like a social media law that limits social media platforms uh, from granting accounts to kids over 13 and then going back and scrubbing and pulling out accounts, which is I think probably going to get not much pushback. So I think they're going to make some ground on privacy, certainly in that space. I think the health area is a place where you see state laws coming and adding sort of health data limitations in terms of the use of that data without consent, um, to specifically do so, uh, going above and sort of beyond the basic HIPAA standard. So I think the administration generally is, obviously when you go from Democrat to Republican in the US, it means less regulation. And so fewer dollars for regulators within which to work and more um, open, potentially business transactions like mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah.
From the FTC side of things. So I think it'll be probably an area of greater activity on the merger and acquisition side, an area, a time where state laws will continue to pass and we'll continue to have state differences. And all of my outside counsel who do privacy work will continue to be well fed and well compensated
Yeah.
for all the work they do for the industry and for people keeping up with, we're at over 20. By the end of 2026, we'll probably be in the 30 US laws. We're getting there. We're getting to 50. And I think that's probably just going to be something that we need to manage. And so to your point earlier about technology, at a certain point, that may just come out of someone's hands and just have to handle 43 state laws. Well, okay. I mean, they're all pretty similar, but they're going to have differences, and you're going to need to have, a novel for a privacy policy at this point.
That's a good case for technology too. The
Yeah.
thresholds for
Yeah.
what's sensitive, what's how many people, how
Yeah.
many in the state, what's yeah,
Yeah.
fine. So
What
any last yeah,
one final
yeah,
sort of thought on the administration change. I mean, I think what's obvious though is that this administration does not have privacy as a priority. So like I don't think anyone waiting and hoping that with an administration change, the US is going to pass a federal law. I don't think that's the case at all. I think what's more likely to happen is more negotiation between the EU and the US just on like transfers and on data sharing and how to
yeah.
kind of increase the commercial relationship between between those economic powers as opposed to anything else. And because I think the EU is also trying to regulate AI, and I think one of the reasons social media companies are keenly interested in working together in order to push the EU to have reasonable AI regulation is they don't want to slow down innovation, and that goes for companies germinating in the EU as well.
So Schrems is sharpening the knife for Schrems III because of Trump's recent decisions in terms of all of these arbiters and all of these sort of neutral. I can't remember the name. I don't know. He fired some people recently, but the idea is it seems like a Schrems III may be in the horizon, and that would be the opposite. So on the one hand, it is true the EU government, so Ursula von der Leyen, she's saying she wants to cut down on regulation, make it easier for business. So that is happening. On the other hand, activism in the EU is stronger than ever, and that would mean a Schrems III. And if it took so much work, I mean, the pains we've gone through, right? With standard contract clauses and all the things that we had to do. Imagine now going over again how this would affect everything. Any thoughts on that?
I've been at this company for 2 years. This is an US only company. So I haven't had this problem for 2 years necessarily, but
Lucky you,
that
yeah.
doesn't mean that I didn't feel it acutely the other two times, right? So um it's real. What you're raising is a real concern and a real problem and a real headache for people in our positions. I think, my friend Pedro raised this, one time when we were talking about it. He was like, if you ask, the CEO of your company, like how big of a problem for them is the fact that your teams need to do a lot of compliance and contract work. Like it doesn't even scratch the top 1,000 things that CEOs are necessarily thinking about. So yes, it's a problem to have to relook at contractual clauses again, or try to find a new way to figure our way through transfer mechanisms. But I think, it's a problem that we'll just need to address when it happens. I think the bigger challenge is for like companies in the space that are working hard at trying to figure out ways to get consumer consent and still provide services that are personalized. I think those two things are at odds. So like consumers want personalized services. Like they if you took Google out of Europe, that would be a travesty. Any country, like if you just couldn't do Gmail or you couldn't, because Gmail has now incorporated AI or serves you an ad based on, some content um in your email, that's creepy to some people, but at the same time, it's a free service. It's the best email there is, and
True.
it's free. So like I
Yeah.
think there's really
Yeah.
important issues at play here. I think Max should do whatever he does. Like that's his Max Schrems serves a purpose, right? He's got to get people paying
That's his
attention.
mission, testing
That's
the
what he
system.
does, right? And so I don't begrudge him and I don't begrudge the companies that disagree with him. I think it's like a good tension. It really is. It neither push and pull. We'll figure it out at some point, but it's going to be like a lot of work, no
That's
doubt.
optimistic. Well, thank you. Thanks, Andy. Thanks again.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, that's all for today. Follow us on Blue Sky and in the Masters of Privacy Altogether profile, you will find the starter pack, which includes the feeds of all of our past guests. There is also a Masters of Privacy LinkedIn channel, which I invite you to follow, where you will find links to our transcripts, cheat sheets, and other surprises every now and then. Our main website is mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.